Sweat stung Rachel Bennett's eyes as she drove her palms into the dying man's chest. The monitor screamed a relentless flatline. "Push one of Epi!" she roared, ignoring the indignant gasp of the hospital CEO standing just feet away. He didn't see a fading life. He only saw a PR disaster. Riverside General Hospital in downtown Chicago was notorious for its grueling night shifts, but trauma nurse Rachel Bennett thrived in the chaos. With years of emergency room experience under her belt, Rachel had seen it all. From multi-car pileups on Interstate 94 to the grim realities of inner-city violence. She was a single mother to a young boy named Tyler, and her job was her lifeline. But more importantly, Rachel was a nurse who operated on instinct, empathy, and an unwavering commitment to the oath she had taken. Rachel was nearing the end of a brutal long shift. Her scrubs were stained with iodine and coffee, her dark hair haphazardly pinned up, and her joints ached with a dull, rhythmic throb. She was just finalizing a chart at the nurse's station when the double doors of the ambulance bay blew open. "We need a team now," shouted paramedic Evans, rushing a gurney into Trauma Bay 1. John Doe, mid-30s, found unresponsive in the alley behind a busy downtown market. No pulse, no respiration. Downtime is estimated at several minutes. We've pushed 2 rounds of epinephrine in the rig, but we're still in V-fib. Rachel sprinted to the bay, snapping a pair of nitrile gloves onto her hands. "Transfer on my count," she ordered the team. 1, 2, 3. They hoisted the heavy muscular man onto the hospital bed. Rachel immediately noted his physical condition. He wasn't a typical transient. Despite the dirt and the tattered, weather-beaten leather jacket, the man was in peak physical condition. His arms were corded with thick muscle, his hands heavily calloused, and a heavy matte black tactical watch was strapped tightly to his left wrist. "Starting compressions," Rachel announced, climbing onto the step stool beside the bed to get the proper leverage over his massive chest. She locked her elbows and began the grueling, physically demanding rhythm of CPR. Staying alive, staying alive. She counted the beats in her head, putting her entire upper body weight into each thrust. "Charge the paddles to 200, yelled Dr. Nathan Hayes, the exhausted attending physician who had just rushed into the room. "Clear." The man's body jolted violently as the electrical current ripped through him. Rachel's eyes darted to the monitor. Nothing. Still a jagged, chaotic line of ventricular fibrillation. "Resume compressions," Dr. Hayes commanded. Rachel was back on the chest instantly. Crack! The sickening sharp sound of a rib breaking echoed in the trauma bay. It was a standard, almost inevitable complication of effective CPR, especially on a broad-chested man, but it always sent a shiver down the spine of anyone unaccustomed to real-life trauma care. Unfortunately, someone utterly unaccustomed to trauma care had just walked into the emergency department. Michael Harrington, the newly appointed Chief Executive Officer of Riverside General, was a man who viewed healthcare purely through the lens of profit margins, liability, and optics. A former hedge fund manager brought in to streamline the hospital's financial bleed, Harrington wore a bespoke 3-piece suit that cost more than Rachel's monthly rent. Tonight, Harrington was leading a late-night VIP tour. Trailing behind him were 3 high-net-worth investors from a private equity firm, including the formidable Brian Whitaker. Harrington was trying to secure a massive grant to build a new luxury recovery wing, and he was eager to show off the smooth corporate efficiency of his emergency department. "And here, gentlemen, you can see our state-of-the-art triage center, where we maintain the highest standards of—" Harrington's voice faltered as the group rounded the corner and stopped dead outside the glass walls of Trauma Bay 1. Inside, it was a scene of controlled violence. Blood from an unseen laceration on the patient's head had smeared across the pristine white sheets. Medical wrappers littered the floor. And there was Rachel, sweat dripping from her chin, aggressively pumping the chest of the John Doe, the sound of cartilage cracking under her palms. Whitaker, the lead investor, visibly blanched and took a step back, pressing a handkerchief to his mouth. "Good God, Harrington. What is she doing to that poor man? It looks like a slaughterhouse." Harrington's face flushed a deep, furious crimson. His perfect tour, his multi-million-dollar pitch, was being ruined by this messy, visceral display of reality. He didn't see a medical team fighting for a life. He saw a massive liability and a PR nightmare unfolding right in front of his primary benefactors. Without thinking, Harrington pushed through the sliding glass doors of the trauma bay. his tailored Italian shoes stepping squarely into a discarded bloody gauze pad. "What is the meaning of this?" Harrington barked, his voice cutting through the frantic beeping of the monitors. "Dr. Hayes, why is this chaos happening in plain view?" "Mr. Harrington, we have a code blue," Dr. Hayes snapped, not looking away from the monitor. "Please step outside." Harrington ignored the doctor and zeroed in on Rachel, who had not broken her rhythm. "You, nurse, stop that immediately. You are breaking the man's bones. You're opening us up to a massive malpractice lawsuit." Rachel briefly locked eyes with the CEO. "He has no pulse, sir. If I stop, he dies." She pushed down again. Crack. "I said stop," Harrington yelled, taking a step toward her. "I attended a seminar on minimized impact resuscitation. You are being overly aggressive. You look like a barbarian. Step away from the patient and let the automated chest compression machine do the work." "The Lucas device is broken," Rachel shot back, her breath hitching with exertion. "And your seminar didn't teach you that broken ribs are better than being dead. Please, get out of my way." Harrington was completely unaccustomed to being spoken to in this manner, let alone by a subordinate in front of multi-million-dollar investors. His ego flared, instantly overriding whatever small amount of common sense he possessed. "I am the CEO of this hospital," Harrington roared, "and I am giving you a direct order to step down from that stool and leave this room. You are creating a horrific spectacle for our guests." "Pulse check," Dr. Hayes yelled, trying to drown out the CEO. Rachel pulled her hands back. The room fell dead silent. The monitor drew a long, agonizingly straight line. "A systole, flatline. Nothing," Rachel said, her voice tight, pushing another milligram of epi, commencing compressions. Before she could bring her hands down, Harrington reached out and grabbed Rachel's shoulder, forcefully yanking her backward. Rachel stumbled off the step stool, her boots slipping on the slick linoleum floor. She caught herself on the edge of a stainless steel counter, knocking over a tray of sterile instruments that crashed to the floor with a deafening clatter. "What is wrong with you?" Rachel screamed, the adrenaline and sheer protective instinct for her patient overriding any fear for her job. "He is dying." "You are out of control, Nurse Bennett," Harrington sneered, adjusting his silk tie as if he had just swatted a fly. He turned to the security guard, Officer Daniels, who had run over at the sound of the commotion. "Officer, remove this woman from my hospital. She is a liability to this institution." "Mr. Harrington, respectfully, she is saving his life," Dr. Hayes interjected, stepping between the CEO and the nurse. "We don't have time for this. Rachel, get back on the chest." Rachel lunged forward, but Daniels, looking incredibly apologetic, caught her arm. "I'm sorry, Rachel. He's the boss." "Let go of me, Daniels. Every second he goes without oxygen to the brain, we lose him." Rachel ripped her arm out of the guard's grasp and shoved past Harrington, nearly knocking the CEO into the glass partition. She scrambled back onto the stool and slammed her hands onto the John Doe's sternum. 1, 2, 3, 4. "That is it," Harrington bellowed, his face practically purple. He pointed a trembling, perfectly manicured finger at Rachel. "You're fired, nurse. Do you hear me? You are terminated, effective immediately. I will see to it that your nursing license is revoked for gross insubordination and medical battery." The investors outside the glass were whispering furiously to one another. Brian Whitaker looked disgusted, though whether it was at the bloody scene or the CEO's unhinged behavior was unclear. "Fire me tomorrow," Rachel yelled, tears of frustration mixing with the sweat on her face. "But tonight, I'm saving this man." "Charge to 300, Dr. Hayes ordered, realizing Rachel was not going to back down. "Clear." Rachel threw her hands up. The shock hit the man's body. They all stared at the monitor. The jagged line bounced, spiked, and then fell into a slow, steady rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. "We have a pulse," Dr. Hayes whispered, leaning over the man with a stethoscope. "It's thready, but it's there. Pressure is low. He's got spontaneous circulation. We did it. Rachel, you did it." Rachel slumped against the wall, her chest heaving. Her arms felt like lead, and her hands were trembling violently. She looked down at the bruised, broken chest of the stranger. He was alive. Against all odds, the John Doe was going to make it to the ICU. Harrington, however, was not moved by the medical miracle that had just occurred. He brushed off his jacket, shooting Rachel a look of pure venom. "Officer Daniels," Harrington said coldly, "escort Miss Bennett to her locker to collect her personal effects and then walk her off the premises." Her badge is deactivated. If she sets foot on Riverside General property again, have her arrested for trespassing. Isana. A heavy silence fell over Trauma Bay 1. Dr. Hayes ripped off his surgical cap, his face a mask of disbelief. Michael, you cannot be serious. She just brought a man back from the dead. She followed standard ACLS protocols to the letter. She assaulted a patient, destroyed hospital property, and humiliated me in front of Vanguard Capital, Harrington replied, his voice devoid of emotion. She is a liability. The decision is final. Rachel felt a cold dread pool in her stomach. Fired. Fired for doing her job. How was she going to pay her rent? How was she going to pay for Tyler's school? The reality of her situation came crashing down, extinguishing the brief high of saving a life. She looked at the unconscious man on the bed. His face was pale, his breathing assisted by a bag valve mask, but he was alive. Rachel took a shaky breath, untied her blood-stained gown, and threw it into the biohazard bin. "It's fine, Dr. Hayes," Rachel said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "I don't want to work for a man who puts a dollar sign on a human life anyway." She walked past Harrington, not giving him a second glance, and let Officer Daniels lead her down the hallway. Behind her, the trauma team began the quiet, urgent work of prepping the John Doe for transport to the intensive care unit. As the team moved the patient, Nurse Kate, Rachel's best friend and colleague, began bagging his ruined clothes. As she picked up the shredded, blood-soaked leather jacket, something heavy clattered against the metal side of the gurney. Kate paused. Reaching into the torn lining of the jacket, she pulled out a thick silver chain. Dangling from the end were two metallic dog tags worn smooth at the edges from years of friction. Kate squinted at the stamped metal under the harsh fluorescent lights. Brooks, Jake J. O positive, U.S. Navy Spec War. Kate's breath caught in her throat. She looked down at the rugged, battered man they had nearly lost. John Doe wasn't a transient. He was a United States Navy SEAL. And judging by the intricate, heavily classified tactical communication device they had just discovered strapped to his ankle underneath his boot, he wasn't just on leave. He was active duty. "Dr. Hayes," Kate whispered, holding up the dog tags, "you need to see this. I think Mr. Harrington just fired the nurse who saved a very, very important man." Outside in the parking lot, the freezing Chicago rain began to fall. Rachel zipped up her thin fleece jacket, clutching a cardboard box holding her favorite coffee mug, a framed picture of her son Tyler, and a stethoscope her late mother had gifted her. She looked back at the glowing emergency room sign, a place she had called home for nearly a decade. A tear finally escaped, sliding down her cheek to mix with the rain. She had won the battle for her patient, but she had lost the war for her livelihood. What Rachel didn't know as she started her beat-up Honda Civic and drove into the dark was that the storm hadn't even begun to hit Riverside General. The man lying in the ICU wasn't just any Navy SEAL. Chief Petty Officer Jake Brooks was a legend in the special warfare community, and the men he served with did not take kindly to civilians playing God with their own. And they were already on their way. Morning sunlight fought a losing battle against the heavy Chicago rain as it crept through the blinds of Rachel's cramped two-bedroom apartment. She sat at her faded Formica kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee clutched in her hands, staring blankly at the eviction warning she had received recently. Fired. The word echoed in her mind, a relentless drumbeat drowning out the sound of the morning cartoons playing in the living room. Her young son, Tyler, padded into the kitchen. His Spider-Man pajamas slightly too short at the ankles, he rubbed sleep from his eyes and crawled into her lap. "You're home early, Mommy. Usually you're sleeping when I wake up." Rachel forced a smile, kissing the top of his messy blonde head. "I finished my work a little early, sweetie. I thought we could spend the whole weekend together." She hugged him tightly, squeezing her eyes shut to stop the tears from falling. She had little money in her checking account. Rent was due soon. She had sacrificed holidays, birthdays, and her own health for Riverside General, only to be discarded like a soiled pair of surgical gloves by a man who didn't know the difference between a pulse oximeter and a paperweight. Across town, the atmosphere at Riverside General Hospital was anything but quiet. The morning shift change was usually a controlled frenzy, but today, an icy tension gripped the intensive care unit. Two matte black Chevrolet Suburbans screeched to a halt in the ambulance bay, completely ignoring the emergency vehicle's only signage. Before the security guard could even step out of his booth, 4 men stepped out of the vehicles. They didn't wear uniforms, but their bearing screamed military. Dressed in civilian tactical gear, heavy denim, combat boots, and weather-resistant jackets, they moved with a synchronized predatory grace. Leading the pack was Commander Robert Kane, standing tall with a jawline carved from granite and eyes the color of a winter ocean. Kane was a veteran of countless classified operations. He didn't ask for directions. He marched straight through the sliding glass doors, his men fanning out flawlessly around him, moving with absolute purpose. "Excuse me, gentlemen, you cannot just walk in here." Officer Daniels, the same guard who had escorted Rachel out the night before, stepped in front of the sweeping desk. Kane didn't break stride. He simply reached into his jacket, pulled out a thick leather credential case, and held it an inch from Daniels' face. "Naval Special Warfare Group 2. We are here for Chief Petty Officer Jake Brooks. What floor?" Daniels swallowed hard, his hand dropping away from his radio. "Fourth floor. Take the service elevator on the left." By the time Harrington arrived at the hospital, clutching a macchiato and feeling immensely proud of how he had managed the crisis the night before, the hospital was buzzing with rumors. When he stepped off the elevator onto the ICU floor, he was entirely unprepared for the sight of two heavily armed federal agents flanking the door to the room. Harrington's bravado flared. He was the CEO. This was his domain. What is the meaning of this? Who authorized armed personnel in my intensive care unit? Commander Kane stepped out of the room, slowly closing the door behind him. He looked Harrington up and down, taking in the designer suit, the perfectly coiffed hair, and the utter lack of calluses on his hands. "You must be Michael Harrington. I'm Commander Kane. The man in that bed is my chief." Harrington's face instantly shifted into a mask of polished, corporate sympathy. A Navy SEAL? This was a PR goldmine. "Commander, it is an absolute honor. I am the Chief Executive Officer here. Please, rest assured your man is receiving the absolute pinnacle of medical care. Our world-class facility and my dedicated protocols undoubtedly saved his life last night. I personally oversaw." Kane interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, low and dangerous. "I've already spoken to the attending physician." Dr. Nathan Hayes stepped out from the nurse's station, his face drawn and exhausted. He hadn't gone home. He had stayed through the night to monitor Brooks. "Dr. Hayes tells me a very different story," Kane continued, taking a slow step toward the CEO. "He tells me my chief was flatlining. He tells me a trauma nurse physically kept Jake's heart pumping while you stood in the doorway and yelled at her about liability." Harrington flushed. "Now, hold on. That nurse was acting recklessly. She fractured his ribs. She was violating our minimized impact policies and embarrassing this institution in front of Vanguard Capital investors. I had to take decisive administrative action." "You fired her," Kane stated, the words sounding less like a question and more like a verdict. "I terminated her employment." "Yes," Harrington countered, trying to stand taller. "It was a necessary executive decision to protect the hospital." Kane leaned in close. The scent of ozone and stale coffee clung to the commander. "Jake Brooks has survived 2 IED blasts, a helicopter crash in the Hindu Kush, and a bullet to the chest in Fallujah. He survives because he refuses to quit and because the people around him refuse to quit on him. That nurse, Rachel Bennett, cracked his chest because she was fighting death with her bare hands. She did exactly what I would have done. She did what any operator would have done." Harrington scoffed nervously. "Be that as it may, hospital policy didn't save my man. Rachel Bennett did," Kane snapped. He turned his head slightly. "Mr. Whitaker, are you hearing this?" Harrington froze. From the waiting area around the corner, Brian Whitaker, the lead investor from Vanguard Capital, slowly walked into view. He was dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, but he walked with a distinct rigid posture that Harrington had never really noticed before. "Loud and clear, Commander," Whitaker said, his eyes fixed on Harrington with absolute disgust. "Brian, what are you doing here?" Harrington stammered, the macchiato suddenly feeling very hot in his hand. "We had a lunch meeting scheduled to finalize the massive expansion grant." Whitaker stopped next to the Navy SEAL commander. "There will be no lunch, Michael, and there will be no grant." Harrington's jaw dropped. "Brian, be reasonable. Last night was an anomaly. I handled the rogue employee. You saw me take control of the situation." "I saw a coward," Whitaker said quietly, the insult hitting like a physical blow. I saw a man who cared more about my checkbook than a dying man on a gurney. I saw a brilliant, dedicated nurse sacrifice her career to save a life while you whined about optics. Whitaker reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, faded lapel pin, fastening it to his lapel. It was the eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps. You didn't do your background research on your investors, did you, Michael? Whitaker asked softly. I served in the 1st Marine Division. I spent time in Helmand Province. I know what it looks like when someone is fighting for a brother's life. Vanguard Capital heavily prioritizes investments in veteran healthcare and institutions with integrity. You possess neither. Brian, please, we can restructure the board. I've already called an emergency board of directors meeting, Whitaker interrupted coldly. As Vanguard holds a controlling minority stake in Riverside General's debt, I am legally within my rights to demand a vote of no confidence. You are finished here, Harrington. Pack your office. A heavy knock startled Rachel. She had spent hours staring blankly at her laptop, mechanically updating her resume. The bleak reality of the local job market was sinking in, and the eviction warning sitting on her kitchen counter felt like a ticking time bomb. She pulled her oversized cardigan tight around her shoulders, wiped her exhausted eyes, and cracked the door open. She gasped, instinctively taking a half-step back. Filling her tiny apartment hallway was Commander Robert Kane, looking like a mountain in a trench coat. Alongside him stood Dr. Hayes, offering a tired but genuine smile, and Brian Whitaker, the imposing investor from Vanguard Capital she had seen the night before. Rachel Bennett? Kane asked, his deep voice softening slightly. Rachel's heart hammered against her ribs. Had Harrington pressed charges? Were the police on their way? Yes, she whispered. Kane reached out a massive, scarred hand. I'm Commander Robert Kane. I'm Jake Brooks's commanding officer, the man you saved last night. Rachel stared at his hand for a second before cautiously taking it. Her immediate thought wasn't of her ruined career, but of her patient. Is he okay? Dr. Hayes stepped forward. He woke up recently, Rachel. He's breathing on his own. His neurological function is completely intact. It's an absolute miracle. Because you refused to stop compressions, his brain wasn't deprived of oxygen. You saved his life. A profound wave of relief washed over Rachel. Her knees went weak and she leaned against the doorframe, letting out a breath she felt she had been holding forever. Thank God he was so strong. He is strong, Kane agreed. But he wouldn't be here without you. I came here to personally thank you on behalf of Naval Special Warfare. You possess a courage under fire that I rarely see outside of a combat zone. Thank you, Commander, Rachel whispered, looking down at her scuffed slippers. But it cost me everything. I don't know how I'm going to take care of my little boy. Brian Whitaker stepped forward, his expression solemn but remarkably kind. Ms. Bennett, I represent Vanguard Capital. I witnessed the entirety of the events last night. What Michael Harrington did to you was an atrocity. He is a disgrace to the medical management profession. Rachel braced herself. Which is why, Whitaker continued, as of recently, the Riverside General Board of Directors voted unanimously to terminate his contract. He is gone. Rachel's head snapped up. What? Furthermore, Whitaker smiled warmly. Vanguard Capital is proceeding with a substantial investment into Riverside General's trauma wing. However, my stipulations were very specific. Part of that funding requires the immediate reinstatement of the nurse who proved she is the beating heart of that hospital. Dr. Hayes chuckled, pulling a thick envelope from his coat. The board wants you back, Rachel, but not just as a trauma nurse. The position of Director of Emergency Nursing has been vacant. With your field experience and your unyielding dedication to your patients, we want you to run the floor. Full benefits, a massive salary increase, and full funding for your staff. Rachel stared at the envelope, her vision blurring with fresh tears. It was completely surreal. She had been destroyed, and now she was being handed the keys to the kingdom. Say yes, Kane urged softly, because Jake wants to meet the woman who hits harder than a Taliban insurgent. Later, Rachel walked the halls of Riverside General in a crisp white lab coat bearing her new title, Rachel Bennett, RN, Director of Emergency Nursing. Harrington's former corner office was currently being gutted to make room for a new triage planning center. She walked into the ICU, nodding to the specialized security detail posted outside the room. They stepped aside instantly, opening the door for her. Jake Brooks was sitting up in bed. He looked battered, his chest heavily wrapped, but his dark eyes were sharp and focused. As Rachel entered, a slight smile touched his face. "So," Jake rasped, his voice deep and rough, "you're the mechanic who broke my chassis." Rachel smiled, checking his monitors out of pure habit. "Your chassis was a little stiff, Chief. I had to apply some percussive maintenance to get the engine running again." Jake laughed, wincing slightly as he clutched his bruised ribs. He reached out, his heavy hand gently wrapping around Rachel's wrist. The humor faded from his eyes, replaced by a piercing sincerity. "My commander told me what happened. You didn't know me. You didn't know what I did, but you threw away your livelihood to keep pushing on my chest." "You were my patient," Rachel replied softly, placing her hand over his. "That's all I needed to know. I've had men die for me," Jake said quietly, "but I've never had a total stranger sacrifice their own life to save mine. I owe you a debt I can never repay, Rachel." "Just heal," Rachel smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Go back to your team and try to stay out of alleys." As Rachel walked out into the Chicago sunshine, the heavy rain from the past few days had finally broken. She pulled out her phone, dialing her babysitter. "Hey, it's Rachel. Tell Tyler to get his shoes on. We're going out for the biggest ice cream sundae in the city." "Yeah, Mommy got a promotion." Rachel's story proves that doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything, ultimately pays off. True heroes don't wear suits. They wear scrubs and dog tags. If this story of justice and medical bravery inspired you, please hit that like button. Share this video with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life stories of everyday heroes standing their ground. In the heart of a chaotic Chicago emergency room at Riverside General Hospital, Rachel Bennett taught us one of life's most powerful and deeply moving lessons. Sometimes doing the right thing will cost you absolutely everything, yet it's still the only choice worth making. As a devoted trauma nurse and single mom fighting every day to provide for her young son Tyler, she knew the risks when she refused to stop compressions on that dying stranger lying on the gurney. With a powerful CEO breathing down her neck and her own livelihood on the line, Rachel chose a human life over her security, compassion over fear, and raw integrity over comfort. In that raw, sweat-soaked moment, it felt like her world was crumbling, her job gone, her stability shattered, and the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her shoulders. But that's the beautiful miracle of real courage. Her selfless determination didn't go unseen. The man she saved turned out to be a Navy SEAL, and her quiet bravery brought justice, restoration, and an even greater purpose she could never have imagined. Rachel's story reminds us that true heroes don't wear suits or chase headlines. They wear scrubs, carry stethoscopes, and refuse to quit even when the world tries to break them. When you stand for what's right, even when it hurts most, life has this incredible way of circling back with blessings you never expected. If this story stirred something deep inside you and reminded you why integrity still matters, drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever sacrificed everything to do the right thing? What happened? I read every single one. If Rachel's courage inspired you, smash that like button, share it with someone who needs a dose of hope today, and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt, real-life stories of everyday heroes who prove that goodness always finds a way to win.